Good evening. Calling the Thursday, May 16, 2019 Zoning Hearing Board meeting to order. Invite everyone to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. There's one matter before us this evening, appeal number 3039, the applicant, Brothers of the Order of Hermits of St. Augustine, property located at 489 Upper Gulf Road and zoned R1 residential. The applicant seeks a variance from section 280-14 regarding use and/or section 280-4, the definition of a family. In the alternative, applicant contends that the use is permitted by right, and this matter was continued from our April 25th, 2019 meeting. We have several counsel here that I'd like, if you've not already entered an appearance, I'd like you to do that now.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. Board, my name is Mark Jonas. My right is Zach Sivertson. We are here on behalf of neighbors Howard and Lonnie Klein, 505 County Line Road, and Arna Moore, 479 Upper Gulf Road. Our clients are budding neighbors.
Thank you.
Peter Nelson on behalf of Radnor Township. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Nick Chiari on behalf of the applicant, Brothers of the Order of Hermits of St. Augustine.
Great. Let's proceed. Nick, before you get going, could you just talk us through jurisdiction very quickly and why the order is the applicant in this proceeding?
Because the applicant will be taking ownership of the property, is being gifted to them by the current owner, and they would actually be the owner of the property and using the property.
But it's not the traditional equitable ownership right that someone would have under an agreement of sale.
It's a gift. The owner is here. He would certainly agree that the order can make this application. He has no objection to the application, and you'll actually hear him as a witness as well.
Anything?
No, thank you.
Good.
Nothing.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Sure. I believe, as the board is aware and the audience is aware, this is a large property on Upper Gulf Road. It's almost 3 acres. It's a large home, about 10,000 square feet. You have the photographs there. The purpose of this, as you can see from the application, is for the order to house their novitiate there. And it would only be for the use of the order themselves. Novitiate would be living there as a single-family unit, living as a family, sharing meals, sharing everything that a normal family does. Just procedurally, what occurred here is last month we continued it to meet with neighbors. We exchanged a number of emails back and forth. We were unable to arrive at a suitable time to have a meeting. But in the interim, we did come to some, hopefully, resolution of the issues. On Monday evening, before we're able to come to the resolution with Mr. Jonas's clients, the township also entered an appearance in opposition to the application. Mr. Nelson can address that. We have agreed to a number of certain conditions if the variance is granted. Certainly, I believe, as the board knows, that for conditions to be imposed, it would have to be from a grant of a variance as opposed to a by right application. Certainly, we are amenable to a variance relief here with conditions. And I'll hand up those conditions. I've already handed them to council. I've marked them as A13, and I'll also read them into the record. The conditions that the Augustinians are willing to agree to are as follows. 813 states, the applicant, Brothers of the Order of Hermits of St. Augustine, hereby agree to the imposition of the following conditions to any grant of relief by the Zoning Hearing Board on the above zoning appeal during the ownership and use of the property by the applicant. 1, any relief would be limited to use only by the applicant as a residence for their order and its novices. 2, any relief granted by the zoning board would terminate upon change in ownership of the property from the applicant. 3, no more than 10 people reside on the premises at any one time. You'll see in the application, it's a large home capable of having 10 bedrooms, and that's where the number of 10 come in. Actually, the proposal for this current year is actually less than 10, but there are 10 bedrooms. Number 4, there will be no additions to the building. Number 5, during the Augustinians' use and ownership, there will be no subdivision of the property. Number 6, and actually I had misnumbered as number 7, there shall be no rental or leasing of the property. Again, misnumbered, I have it as number 8, it should be number 7. A privacy fence shall be installed by the applicant in accordance with township rules and regulations on the property to delineate/separate the driveway at 479 Upper Gulf Road from the entrance to the property. 479 Upper Gulf is right behind the property. So that is the reason for that request and for that condition. The next condition, there will be no signs on the property and no statues at the entrance of the property. In other words, the neighbors, rightfully so, want this to be treated as a residence, just like the Augustinians wish to be treated, have this treated as a residence also, and not appear as if there's any other type of use going on. And finally, the above shall be included as restrictions on the property and recorded in the Recorder of Deeds of Delaware County as a deed declaration of covenants during the ownership of the property by the applicant. And my understanding is Mr. Jonas's clients are in agreement with that. I believe the township's position is going to be if the neighbors are happy, they're happy. So that's how we'll start. We'll make that as part of the record and subject to, hopefully, to the relief that this board would grant to the applicant.
Thanks.
Jim?
Good evening.
Norman's good for you.
Yes. James E. Colleran, Colleran.
And Jim, are you the owner of the subject property?
With my wife, who's a co-owner, yes.
And I'm showing you as A2, and this is the deed to the property?
Don't have my glasses, but I'm certain that that's the deed to the property if you say so.
Okay. And also, the applicant, the Augustinians, they have your permission to proceed with this application here this evening?
Yes, they do.
And if this application is approved, you will be gifting this residence, this premises to the Augustinians?
Myself and my wife will be making the gift.
And I have attached the gift letter as A3.
That's correct.
When did you purchase the property?
August 1984.
And how did what did you do with the property when you purchased it?
Well, an awful lot is the short answer, but let me be a little specific in delineating the highlights of changes we made to the property during our many years there. It was a bit run down when we bought it, both on the inside and on the outside. Outside porches were in disrepair, and these are just not insubstantial porches. They're very, very heavy, old, intricate porches which required master technicians and craftsmen to restore them. We brought the house back to where we thought it should be given its original design within a matter of 5 or 6 years, but it was a constant expense to do so, and we lived around contractors who were coming and going. There are many porches on the house. Well, I say many, 3 or 4. We screened in what was a screen porch overlooking a pool and made that part of the house and put a very attractive room at the end of the house. About 12 to 15 years ago, we demolished a freestanding detached garage, which was never part of the original design of the property. And we spent an enormous amount of money and effort in building a 5-car garage, utilizing the same stone as was used in the original construction of the home, which was in the early 1930s, so that the stone matches very, very well.
Did you raise your family there?
We did. We moved in 1984, and the last of our children left there probably 15 years ago.
Have you been living there consistently in the last several years?
No.
Have you moved somewhere else?
Yes. When I was working, I recently retired. I worked for 51 years as a lawyer in downtown Philadelphia. So 10 years ago, my wife and I moved downtown so that we could get nearer to work, since our children were no longer in the residence, and we decided the time had come for me to be able to walk to work.
And how long ago was that?
About 10 years ago.
And since that period of time, have you had the property listed for sale?
We have probably 9 to 10 years, with a period of maybe 9 months or so in the interval when we took it off the market to refresh the whole deal kind of thing.
Have you been able to sell it?
No.
I'm going to show you what I've marked as A4, and this is the site plan of the property.
Yep.
And here's a larger
Sure.
plan. And this shows the existing home on the property.
It does.
And what's the size of it? And actually does not show the garages as they currently exist, correct?
Correct. It shows the garage that was on the property when we bought it, but not the garage that we added, which really connects with the main residence.
And we have a photograph of that we'll show
Okay.
the board. Okay. And the property is actually 2.865 acres.
Correct.
And how big is the house? Over 10,000 square
It's
feet?
over 10,000 square feet.
And it looks like it's serviced by a long driveway, is that correct?
Yes, a long driveway.
From county line to your property.
County line cutting right through the property and going over to the border with the adjoining property, which is owned by Mrs. Moore.
Okay. I'm going to show you what I've marked as A5, and that's an aerial photograph. And does that indicate where 489 Upper Gulf Road is located?
It does.
And there is an up above 489, there's looks like a large property that's kind of cleared. What property is that?
I believe that's the Armenian Academy, which is a school.
I'm going to show you A6, and can you tell us what A6 represents?
A6 is a picture looking into my property, Mary and my property. And there's a gate there. We have a gate at the end of the driveway.
And A7.
That is a picture of the driveway cutting through the middle of the picture, and it's from inside the lot looking towards the 2 columns through which the gates are, so that one enters at the gates and drives down the property from the middle of driving in from the middle of the photo towards the bottom.
And A8?
A8 is the front of the property, and a decorative fountain with 2 young kids and an umbrella. None of that existed, by the way, the fountain. So that was one of many, many improvements that we made during our ownership. But that's the front of the property, as if one had his or her back to Upper Gulf Road.
A9.
A9 is the back of the property, and it shows the 2 of the exterior porches, one at the lower level, one above.
A10?
A10, they're the garages that we put on, as I testified before.
Why do you wish to preserve the house?
Well,
Let me
absolutely.
ask you this.
Sure.
Go ahead. You answer
Sure.
that. Yeah.
Very much in our own minds and desires is the preservation of the house. Why? Because It's unique in our opinion. It's massive. It's substantial. It was built many years ago with extraordinary care. I can't imagine the cost. If you enter the basement of this house, you think you're in some kind of a big commercial facility. And it just has character. It's got original molding, hardwood floors throughout, big rooms, thick walls. It's just beautiful to look at and beautiful to live in.
Why are you making the gift to the Augustinians?
Well, because first of all, the thought didn't even occur to us to gift it when we were actively trying to sell it for many years. But as it didn't sell and we thought about it, we began to think that we wanted to preserve it, and we wanted the next owner to be some person or entity that could preserve it and would have an interest in preserving it, and would not be just a transient owner who then would sell it in the short order thereafter. And secondly, we've long had a great affinity and respect for the Augustinian friars. And they are geographically close to the home. So when we thought of who might be an acceptable taker of the home, it was a fairly quick realization that we couldn't find a better group to give it to than the Augustinian friars. And then as it occurred, we had that thought, and then we learned that they were looking for a property early this year to move some of their novices here. And it just came together. And it said to me and my wife, things happen for a reason. And we are most happy to gift it to the Augustinians.
Okay.
We like what they do. We like who they are. And frankly, as I thought how our neighbors might react, I thought they would react with joy and a bit of relief that this is the kind of an owner who will take meticulous care of the property, preserve the property, which I think is in the interest of all of the owners and even of the township, and also be perfect neighbors in the sense that they will be quiet, contemplative, and raise no issues that sometimes neighbors might raise. So for all the reasons, it seemed like a perfect thing to me.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Any board questions?
Oh, Jim, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yeah.
Mr. Cowan, during the period of attempted sale, what feedback did you receive from your broker as to the factual basis for the problem in moving the property?
Almost a typical response, despite many people who have seen it over almost a decade, which was, we love it. Many of them came back a second time and brought architects with them to renovate it to their own taste and liking. But it never went through because people would say, it's just too intimidating. It's too big. Too much of a burden, a lot of land to take care of. It's almost 3 acres. And this lot has many, many trees on it. The wind blows and there are leaves on the ground. It's a big undertaking for an owner. And my wife and I know that because we've been carrying this property for 10 years. It requires a great deal of interest, a great deal of love to want to do it, and it takes capital to do it. And unfortunately, it wasn't that the house wasn't perceived as extraordinary. Everyone saw it that way. But the limitations of their family size, it's too big for us. Or the expense, it just never came to fruition. And after a few years, we began to think this just isn't an accident. It's a difficult sell. And that proved to be the case as time went by.
Just one or two questions. Mr. Collar, I just follow up to one of your comments. Thank you very much. Just a follow-up to one of your comments. You said that the friars were close to the home. Could you explain what that means?
Well, I mean, the Friars are in Radnor Township.
And do you know what type of facility it is that you're referring to?
Oh, no, I didn't mean where they live is close to it. I mean that the Friars, this is not a situation where we were trying to gift it to an order in Philadelphia. In other words, these priests are local. Their operation is local. They run St. Thomas of Villanova Parish, which we go to frequently, so that they're right in the community. They're part of it. They know the values of the community. They know the geography. They have been through the house. They were just a perfect match. They weren't not people coming from 15 miles away and getting to learn the community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Peter?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Kathy Thompson. Kathy, and a very unusual spelling of Thompson. No H and no P. Tomson.
Kathy, where do you reside?
I live in Newtown Square.
Okay.
I spent 28 years in Radnor and decided to downsize about 4 years ago and sold my home in Radnor and moved to Newtown Square.
What's your profession?
I'm a residential real estate agent, and I've been working for Berkshire Hathaway out of the Devon headquarters office for the last 25 years.
And how long have you been a real estate agent?
25 years.
25 years, okay. Are you familiar with the mainline real estate market?
Oh, my goodness, yes. 25 years worth of familiarity.
How many listings or purchases have you been involved in, would you say? If you want to go yearly or over the 25 years or?
Well, you asked me this yesterday, and just I would have to say close to 1,000 homes. Some years we do 60, 70 homes. On a year that when we went through the downturn, we maybe did 40 or 45 homes. So probably over 25 years, close to 1,000 homes.
Okay, so you're familiar with the real estate market?
Very much so. And
right.
it probably represents about $500 million worth of sales.
Okay. Are you the agent, the listing agent for this property?
I am.
How long have you been the listing agent?
Well, gosh, I started working with Jim and Mary in 2010, and I had that property listed for about 6 years then. And then the Collarans opted to make a switch and just see if there was somebody else that maybe could deliver the buyer for them. And then we re-engaged in the fall of 2018. So I've had it now for maybe 6 months.
So it's been for sale since
Off and on
2010?
since 2010.
Have there been many showings?
Early on, maybe 5 or 6 a year, because as I think probably everyone knows, the higher the price point, the fewer capable and willing buyers we have. So when the house was priced significantly higher, there were fewer buyers that were in the market for it. Since I relisted it in October of 2018, I've had 11 showings. The current price is $1,750,000. It's more in line with where the buyer population is, but there's still not an abundance of buyers even at that level. And the feedback has been pretty much what Jim described. If you try to think about who is the target buyer for a property like this, you'd probably have to say it's somebody in their 40s who have been relatively successful, family people, and that's who I've seen come through as buyers. Feedback essentially has been it's just too big and too much overwhelming work to be done to bring it into the new millennium, which the 40-something buyer is looking for.
Why hasn't it been able to sell?
Well, really, it's the size and the price. It's a combination. And the things that have changed over the 25 years that I've been selling real estate is 25 years ago, the 40-something buyer wanted a statement house. Things have changed a lot. And the 40-something buyer today wants an SUV and experiences and not a labor of love. And the Collarans have made that house a labor of love, and that's what people wanted when they purchased it. And just the demographic And what that buyer is looking for today is very different.
Have the potential buyers expressed a concern with the upkeep expense of the home?
Oh, no question about it. And Mr. Colleran mentioned that many of the buyers have come in there with architects, and what they're really looking to do is redesign the floor plan so that it is a little bit more family-friendly with young children, and essentially they come back and say it requires $1 million worth of renovation work. Now, the house is in pristine condition. It has been meticulously maintained. You could eat off of the floors, it's so beautiful. But unfortunately, it just doesn't meet what that 40-something buyer is looking for today.
Is there issues with the buyer regarding the layout of the home?
Yes.
And what type of issues do they have with the layout?
Well, the house is what I would call, or I think it's more typically known as what you would call a railroad house, where the house is 32 feet deep front to back, and the rooms run from left to right. So the living room / family room is on the left side of the house, and the kitchen mudroom is on the right side of the house. So it really was designed more when people had live-in help, and the formal rooms of the house were where people lived, and we don't live that way today. You know, people want family rooms open to the kitchen, open floor plan designs where the parents are close to their kids, and that's not the design of this home.
So would you say it lacks the modern amenities of?
Floor plan, absolutely, absolutely.
Has there been a concern about the cost of utilities?
Well, it's the cost of everything. It's the maintenance of the property. You know, I would classify this as a landmark property. It is spectacular. It's beautiful to look at. It's beautifully maintained. I haven't seen another house like that in Radnor Township. It is truly unique. It's beautiful, but it's expensive.
What's the age of the home?
It's about 90 years old.
Over the course of time, has the market changed? I think you kind of alluded to it with the buyer and what the buyer is looking for.
No question about it. And the buyers today are looking for smaller homes. Even initially, when there was a lot of development in Radnor Township, like Brook Farm, people wanted big houses. Even the Brook Farm houses are hard to sell today because that buyer population is looking for something different. What motivates them, the goals they have, and what they expect out of a family life is different than how we were raised and how we raised our kids. Really, truly, they want experiences, and they don't want to be tied to real estate, to maintaining a home or maintaining a property.
So during your course of being the agent for this house, have you been able to find a traditional family, mother, father, children, to take this house?
I have not. I have not. And we have looked. And we have done lots and lots and lots of marketing. And, you know, I had 11 people come through since October. And I just can't make it fit with what they're looking for.
Thank you.
Board questions?
Ms. Thompson, in your professional experience, have you had prior experiences where a property sat on the market for 9 years and wasn't sold?
No, I have not. I have not.
Thank you.
Counsel?
No, thank you.
Between the first time you listed it and the second time you listed it, sounds like you've dropped the price, or the sellers have dropped the price significantly?
Yes, there's been dramatic price adjustments in the property, and it still doesn't seem to bring in the buyer. It's we started out in 2010 at 3.8 million, and we are now down to $1,750,000. And over 9 years, there were multiple price adjustments to bring it down to the $1,750,000
And how long has it been listed for that?
since October.
So we're working
6
on
months.
6 months.
Yeah,
Long.
yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Father Michael?
I do. Father Michael DiGregorio, D-I, capital G, R-E, Gorio.
And Father Michael, what is your position with the order?
I'm the religious superior for the Augustinians of the East Coast
How long have you been a member of the order?
since 1966.
And currently, where do you live?
I live on Ashwood Road in a property that the province owns. Yeah.
And you've received this gift offer from the Collarans, correct?
Yes.
And if this was approved this evening, you would accept?
We would.
Okay. And you also heard me read in and mark as A13 certain conditions that you would agree to with any approval.
We agree to all those conditions.
Can you tell us a little bit about the order?
Sure. We're a religious community, very old, founded in 1244. We've been in the United States since 1796, came to Philadelphia, established ourselves in Philadelphia, and some 20, 30 years later moved out to this area and established Villanova. We have many different ministries that we perform. We're highly into education and also into parochial ministry, parish ministry. We serve in Massachusetts, upstate New York City, greater Philadelphia area, and South Jersey presently. We also do missionary work in Japan and Peru. There are 150 of us friars who belong to this eastern province, eastern district of the order, about 100 of whom are very active in these various ministries. The others are some of our students in formation. Others are retired or infirm.
We mentioned some ministries you have locally, and you did mention Villanova, which you established, I believe, in 1842.
Correct.
What other ministries do you have?
In addition, we have the parish of St. Thomas of Villanova that's also been mentioned. We have a parish of Our Mother of Good Counsel in Bryn Mawr. We have a number of parishes in the city of Philadelphia. We have Malvern Prep and St. Augustine Preparatory School in Richland, New Jersey.
I've marked as A12 an exhibit that is listed as mission statement. Can you tell the board what that represents?
The mission statement outlines exactly how we see ourselves and what we believe our purpose is as a religious community and also as ministers within the Catholic Church. It talks about our value system as descendants of a heritage left us by St. Augustine way back in the 5th century. We follow a rule of life that he established for his own monastic way of living. And we try to perpetuate these values through our own lifestyle, living together in religious community, but also in the various ministries that we perform.
Now, how many provincials are in the United States?
There are 3 provinces in the United States, ours in the east, one in the Midwest, and one in California.
I've marked as A11, and the board already has this, a description of the novitiate and what their life is. First, can you tell us first you're intending to house your novitiate in this property if this is approved, correct?
Yes. The novitiate experience is one of the first experiences of individuals who are interested in considering our way of life, that is, considering joining our religious community. And this first year in which they spend a whole year, a year and a day, in fact, is what would resemble a monastic life, I think, in most people's ordinary understanding of a monastic type of living. That is, it's an enclosed life, it's a life of study, intellectual pursuit, coming to understand our value system, our tradition, our history, studying the spirituality of the church, learning how to live together as a religious community, which I'd say is not far-fetched in being described as a religious family, so that we do everything together. We eat together, we pray together, we recreate together. Part of their life as novices, since they're young men, is also to engage in manual work. So to have a property such as this provides great opportunity for them to be engaged in manual work and the upkeep of the property itself. So this is the kind of a property we would really ideally be looking for to house 4, 5, 6, 7 novices where they have ample space in order to have moments of privacy and seclusion, but also an opportunity really to be able to use all of their talents for a very holistic appreciation of their own life, individually and collectively.
Do they attend this school?
They do not attend school. They study within the residence itself.
They're all college grads?
All college grads.
Is it a regimented schedule?
Oh, there's a daily schedule that I would say most people would think of as regimented. Yeah.
What's the length of the novice program?
It's a year and a day. So they would begin in August and end in August.
Currently, are they housed in a house? Your novices from last year or in prior years?
Currently, they're housed in a monastery that's attached to a parish in Racine, Wisconsin. A very large monastery that was built to accommodate 40 friars. Presently, we have 1 novice and 3 friars who are part of his formation team. So it's a house that's overly big for our purposes.
Are you still going to use that property?
No, we're leaving that property
All right. And is there a reason why you're leaving that property?
because the house just does not accommodate our program. It's not, for 4 people to live in a house that size is unrealistic. It does not fulfill the purposes for which we come together. It does not provide an atmosphere really to create a good community experience. And we're no longer able to minister in that parish. So it's a twofold decision of ours, to leave the parish and to withdraw from the ministry.
And you also have a large ministry here in eastern United States.
In this area, we have many friars. And our other objective is to bring our novices closer to other Augustinian communities so that they have the benefit of really having other friars interact with them who are able to bring their experiences. Out in Wisconsin, they're very much isolated from the rest of us.
How many novices do you have scheduled for next year?
4.
And in addition to novices, would anyone else be residing in
There would be 3 friars who are part of the formation team, and their responsibility is to work with them, train them, give them spiritual guidance and direction. And 1 or 2 of them may also have other responsibilities outside of the novitiate, but they're all part of a needed formation team in order to provide multiple perspectives on how they're progressing in their way of life.
And the friars, how long would they be there? Are they a 1-year term?
No, they stay for a term, which is an unlimited term. They could be there for 5 or 6 years and be transferred as the needs arise.
Would the novices and the friars live in this property as a single housekeeping unit?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Would they be eating meals together?
They eat meals together. They have common prayer several times a day. Eucharist would be celebrated every day. As I said, there's recreation within the common room, the living room of the facility, and the opportunity to make use of the grounds outside of the home.
Would they each have their own sleeping accommodations?
Yes,
There
private bedrooms,
there only-
absolutely.
Only be one kitchen in the house?
There's 1 kitchen, 1 dining room.
Would they all have equal access to the home?
Yes,
Would they share the furnishings of the home?
everything is shared. The novices don't bring furniture with them. The house is furnished, and it remains furnished. When they leave, everything stays and for the next class to come in.
Is it important for the novices to live in this type of community as a family?
It is, because family living is the way of life of Augustinians. so that I live with 2 other friars. And we live in what you would consider to be a typical home. We have a common kitchen, common dining room. We eat together. We each have our own private room. We have a common TV room. We have a chapel. So we share what we do together. But we also have room and space for solitude, to be alone, to engage in our own study. One of the friars is a professor at Villanova University. The other friar is an assistant in the parish of Bryn Mawr, and I, the provincial. So my work is tied up with overseeing the ministries and the friars of the province. So we have different works that we do, but our life is shared each day.
Thank you.
Good. You're welcome.
George?
Father, is there any scenario where a novice would come in and stay for less than a year?
If he decides that that this is not for him, and he would desire to withdraw, he leaves. And that happens in conversation with his director.
Okay. And is there any scenario where new novices would come in like during the year, like in December or January, or?
Not typically, no. And I'd say rarely. I would be hard-pressed to think of an occasion when that has happened, because there's a natural starting point where they're all beginning together,
Right.
and are learning gradually the rhythm of our life. And to have someone come in after 3 months or 6 months just does not allow for the proper integration of these individuals as a
Right.
community.
So that person would need to wait until the next
Exactly.
term.
Yes, so we always begin, always, I would say, there's always a starting date, typically August,
Right.
and then the completion is August, and at the completion, if they're successful, they profess their vows. They become Augustinians
Oh, okay.
when that year is ended.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Father, do the novices have personal cars?
No, they do not.
Thanks.
On a somewhat related question, in terms of the frequency with which people will be entering the property, leaving the property, what is the the typical day-to-day in terms of people coming onto and leaving the property and whatnot?
You mean those who are not members of that community?
That's correct.
I would say irregular, as best I could say. The nature of this year is really a considerable amount of isolation and seclusion, because the purpose for the novices is that they really spend time in reflection, prayer, reading, so that it's not a house where we would be continually inviting people in who would disrupt, in a sense, the rhythm and the schedule of their way of life. However, honestly, one of the reasons we wish to come back to this area is so that there is exposure to other friars who can be invited for dinner, to come in, to spend some time, so that the novices can get to know who the friars of the province are. We want to build up this relationship so that there's a certain amount of independence and isolation, but at the same time, one of the benefits of being where we are many is that they come to know real Augustinians and can see who we are and how we live our lives. So there would not be the expectation that there would be a regular flow of individuals visiting the novitiate.
I don't want this to sound poor, but to maintain this house and the grounds, it cost a lot of money, I would imagine.
Well, I would have to depend on Jim. I hear that it costs money. I would expect that our novices would be responsible for doing a lot of the work. So things like all those leaves that fall from the trees and the snow that needs to be shoveled, that's precisely what we would like them to be able to do.
Sure, but as in the township, the revenue that would be taxes that we would get from this estate, I pay, all families pay taxes. You guys wouldn't have to pay property tax or anything on an ongoing basis with this gift, right?
I think
The There's been discussion regarding that. They own other homes in Radnor where they do pay full property tax.
For this property, will they pay taxes?
We haven't really discussed it. It came up Monday night, of course, before the Board of Commissioners, and we hadn't really discussed it. Father Michael has, my concern is right now this is way over assessed, this property. It's assessed at probably a fair market value or a presumed value of about $2.5 million, which is way over assessed. So if they were going to pay taxes, we probably would move to reduce the taxes. Now, remember, probably the following year, Delaware County is doing a countywide reassessment, so it's going to be reassessed hopefully properly at that time. But right now, a lot of the big homes you may be aware in Radnor are way over assessed because they just are not selling.
But I imagine the kind gift and the generosity, there's some tax benefit by giving it away. So you could probably match that up to, as to what the gift was, that would be the tax burden.
We have discussed the whole tax issue, and yeah, I don't know if it's an issue for here, but we've discussed it, and Father Michael has tended to agree that they would not file for an exemption.
As Nick has said, we do pay taxes on other properties in Radnor Township that we own.
And I'm sure we all appreciate it, but for this one, it hasn't been decided whether taxes will be applied or not.
It hasn't been decided.
And so at what point, if we make this decision, will we know then whether it is or isn't, or is it just further down the road?
Scott, I'm sorry. These are all valid points in the right forum. This is not the right forum for these discussions.
Yeah, sure.
Father, following up Mr. Simon's question, besides snow and leaves and pruning, Mr. Colleran testified this is an extraordinary property that requires a lot of upkeep to keep it in its unique character. So could you just sort of follow up and tell us how, in terms of infrastructure, aesthetics, how you're going to be able to maintain that property? This is obviously a beautiful neighborhood, and how are you going to, what are your plans to do that?
Well, the property is being gifted to the province. It's not being gifted to the novitiate community. So the province, this wider umbrella organization, of which I'm the religious superior, supports our formation program. So the province supports the houses of our students who are in training. So it would be the province's responsibility to maintain this property. So in terms of structural questions that need to be addressed, we would assume the responsibility for that. We take care of the property. Trees that need to be pruned that novices can't do themselves, the province then hires someone to do that work, as we do in our other properties.
Have you analyzed or calculated what the annual upkeep would be for this
No.
property? You have not yet?
No, have not.
Would the occupants then, based on the testimony, be limited to the novices and the 3 friars?
That's right.
And these are the first-year novices, the year-and-a-day novices?
That's right.
And you mentioned what their program is like for the novices, and obviously this is part of a larger organization. Is there any interaction with the novices off-site with any of the other properties or facilities of the Augustinians?
Oh, sure. There would be occasions when they're invited to come to my community, for example, or to any other community, or to go to one of our parishes on a Sunday, for example. They might go out to Mass at Good Counsel in Bryn Mawr, or they might do some ministerial experience, get some training for a couple of hours a week by visiting nursing homes or going to a hospital or something like that. So in that sense, they're not locked in there. I didn't mean to give that impression. But the sum and substance of their life is really internal. But it doesn't mean that gate is going to keep them inside 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Is it fair to say then, every week, sometime each week, there would be some outside interaction, whether
Certainly.
it's volunteer work or training or...
Mm-hmm.
And are they attending church Sunday off-site?
They could very well be,
But not necessarily?
not necessarily.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Since they don't have cars, how are they transported to these off-site events or
The community
activities?
would have cars. Either they all go together. 4 of them going together is not a problem. Or someone has the use of a car. I mean, they have the use of a car. They can drive, but they don't have personal cars.
And just, who handles the normal day-to-day activities of the family, such as grocery shopping, those sorts of things?
The responsibilities are divided amongst those 3 friars. One friar is the director of the novices. He's personally responsible for their schedule, for their guidance. He gives them spiritual direction. He has sessions with them to teach them about our charism, our history, et cetera, et cetera. There's the prior of the community, who is responsible for the running of the entire community, so novices and friars together. And then someone's appointed as the treasurer of the community, who would be responsible for overseeing all the expenses, all the needs that have to be tended to. One of the novices might be appointed to go and do the shopping, or maybe the treasurer would do the shopping. Those are the things that are divided up according to the determination of the director of the novices.
And other than the 3 friars, there's no other employees or members of your province that are going to be there on a regular basis?
No.
And the friars and/or the novices, they're the ones who are doing the cooking, the cleaning?
In some cases, that's true. In other cases, they might have, as many of our communities have, someone to come in and cook dinner, maybe 5 nights a week. Presently, that's the situation. In our novitiate in Wisconsin, there's a cook who comes in 5 nights a week to do the evening meal. The weekends, the novices take care of the meals, and breakfast and lunch, they do it together themselves.
And since there's going to be 10 bedrooms in this house, I guess, I'm assuming the maximum number of novices would be 7?
Yes, it would have to be.
And you basically, you have a year and a day program, and then the next group comes in within a week or 2?
Yes.
And it keeps rotating
Yeah, after
through?
2 weeks. Correct.
Thank you, that is all.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have at this time.
The deed marked? I might be. A2. A1 being the application? I have everything after that. That's what I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Going to move the exhibits?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. I have a couple questions that go to the interpretation of the relevant section of the code. So let's, if we could, perhaps talk about that a little bit now. The code itself is fairly explicit in terms of its definition. Let me, excuse me for a second. So 280-4. Of family.
Family.
Yes. And at the risk of boring everyone that's already heard this, family is defined as one or more persons occupying the same dwelling unit and living and cooking as a single housekeeping unit. Said unit consisting only of individuals who are related by blood, marriage, or otherwise by law. And then it continues in a
Except-
fashion that's not.
And it says except for foster.
Right, right.
May include foster children.
Right, so the relevant portion of the definition of family is that which I just read.
Right.
The challenge here is consisting only of individuals who are related by blood, marriage, or otherwise by law. How are we to think about that in the context of your request for relief?
Okay. As we've been mentioning, it is a single housekeeping unit. It is similar to a family. To some extent, it is similar to foster care, except you have priests living there as opposed to foster children. Now, all that being said, part of the relief here is a variance relief, and the variance relief being from the definition of family, in that the Augustinians really have no place to live except in a single-family residence. Also, as I mentioned in the opening, certainly if a variance was granted, conditions can certainly be granted to any grant on a variance as well. Whereas if you decided by right, the conditions would be just an agreement that we've made saying that we would deed restrict the property. But I think you have to look at family and what family means and how it is a single housekeeping unit, which is what it is here too. It refers to a may consist of, but the foster child situation is very similar to what's going on.
Yeah,
But,
let's assume for our discussion here that the definition ends where I stopped reading. The language, again, calls out fairly clearly. Said unit consisting only, not may, only, of individuals who are related by blood, marriage, or otherwise by law. Is there guidance from Pennsylvania courts on how we might look past that express requirement in the code to somehow expand the definition? In essence, do you really have a by right argument, or?
Certainly, as I've stated all along here, I know that neighbors would feel more comfortable if this was granted, that it's granted by variance, because then certainly the conditions can be attached to that. As to the by right, I did cite cases in my memo that talked about single housekeeping unit. I understand your analysis that if you just look at the definition, it's not applicable to this situation because they're not related. I did not raise any type of constitutional argument, regarding it or RLUIPA or any of those ordinances. And we'd be here for a long time, and Mr. Jonas would be having a good time with that one as well.
Go ahead, Bill.
I had thought that you should have considered canon law.
There's a lawyer joke for everybody. So in terms of, okay, so if we are not proceeding on the basis of a by right request, the issue then becomes unnecessary hardship, doesn't it? What are your thoughts in that area?
The unnecessary hardship, as I mentioned, was that the Augustinians really have no place to go except in a single-family residence.
But doesn't the hardship have to apply to the property in question, not the particular administrative circumstance that the order finds itself in?
And of course, that's the second part of it, is we presented testimony here as to the difficulty on selling this home and all the problems we've had because of the size of the home. And its size, it's been unable to sell. We've had testimony from both the realtor and to the owner that's been listed for almost 10 years and been unable to sell at any type of reasonable price, and really there's been no offers for it. Under those circumstances, again, I did cite some cases that talk about diminished value due to large homes. Certainly, the era has changed from these large homes. As Kathy Thompson testified to, the new home buyer is looking for something different. We've seen these large homes on the market for years and years and years. They're just unable to sell. and they end up either being knocked down or subdivided or something of that nature, which is something that the owner does not want to happen here. And that was one of the reasons why he thought this was a perfect situation, is gifting it to the Augustinians.
So then, it's not that the property cannot be used for a permitted use in the zoning district. Certainly, to the extent that if this board was to provide relief, it would continue, it could be seen to continue being used as a single-family residence. But the shift in the real estate market doesn't mean that it can't be used as a single-family residence, right?
No, it can be used as a single-family residence, but you
Because
also
I'm
consider-
getting back
yeah,
to the issue of hardship
right.
and
Remember, there's also circumstances where under zoning law, that reduced value, substantial reduced value, comes into play as far as establishing a hardship. And in this instance, this really can't be used. No one's going to take on the burden of a single family. The evidence has shown that no one will take on the burden of living in this house as a single family due to the cost of the upkeep, the size of the home, the actual facility itself not being modern, the layout of the home. There's a number of reasons that are unique to this property as to why a hardship has been established as to this house itself. Could someone live in here for free? I don't know if they would want to, because it's not going to be for free, because of all the upkeep that would be involved in it. And the fact that perhaps they could sell this home for $100, that is a hardship in itself. The fact financial circumstances do come into play when you're considering unnecessary hardship.
anything else from,
Yeah, Nick, so I had another question, and this goes back, I guess, to the definition of family. So this is, I guess, more back to the by right argument. The cases you put in your brief, although, those cases didn't have the specific type of ordinance we're dealing with, they did talk about the concept of permanence and the non-transient nature of the property where relief was granted.
Right.
And they cited a bunch of cases where, if residents were there for 2 to 6 months to 8 to 9 months, it was considered too transient and therefore not a family. So have you found anything that suggests that if you're there for a year, it is considered more permanent and not a transient situation? No, it's okay. You can hear me.
There's cases cited in the memo when you're talking about the relative stability and permanence, as you mentioned, of the residents. The ones where it was denied were certainly different than what is this instance. For example, where the average stay, as you cited, was 2 to 6 months, they said this level of instability and transience was incompatible with the single-family concept. In this instance, we have them here for a year and a day, and as a group, and then the next group comes in for a year and a day. So it's not like people moving in and out, as were cited in these cases where they say it was transient. And in one of the instances, the Hartman case, that was where terminally ill residents, and they were possibly not living for a year or for 6 months. And the court, yeah. And they
Still considered permanent in that case?
Yeah, they're considered permanent in that case.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
so as opposed to the recent Supreme Court case in Slice of Life, which you've probably seen, which is sort of the Airbnb type
Right.
restriction. I mean, that's certainly, I mean, that case is really the other end of the extreme, where it was intended to be a purely rental property, purely transient
And
relation.
I'm sure you're going to probably see one of those sometime in the near future, I would guess, but
Thank you again.
not for me, but I'm just saying, I'm just assuming that's going to happen, because that seems to be the trend now.
Okay, I want to open the floor to anyone in the I'm sorry, are we done with questions, Bill?
Actually, Mr. Chair, can I ask?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Gus.
No, no, please, to raise for the applicants and the parties.
Nick, is that microphone on? It might be near the other, we're getting a hum.
Is the one that's humming it. Mr. Cornelia, as opposed to, or could you, in a means of providing the board with possibly more than one option for granting a variance, as opposed to granting a variance for the definition of a family, how about for the use?
Yeah, for the
Rectory
use
uses, rectory uses are permitted under the code, but not for this zone, correct?
Correct.
R3s
I think it's
has.
R3 or
Right,
R2
and-
or
and
something of that
others as
nature.
well.
Right. Yeah, and normally you're talking about a rectory use, which is, of course, associated with a church. You know, as someone brought up the other night, like St. Catherine's has a rectory there, you know, associated with the church itself. But there is no basically standalone in Radnor Township. There's no standalone rectory, you know, that I'm aware of.
No, correct, and rectory is not defined in our code, although
Right.
it's mentioned.
It's not, yeah,
And
it's
it's
not
not
defined.
necessarily.
And I don't know if this is a rectory or not, so then the argument would be, is it actually excluded, and is it permissible exclusion? Well,
Well-
that hasn't been raised, but
Well, if it's not permitted, it's excluded.
yes.
But making a rectory argument would assume it's some sort of an accessory use, but
Right.
we're missing.
Yeah, we don't have a church here. I mean, they have a little chapel in the house, but it's not a church.
Mr. Chairman, at some point, I'd just like to address the legal issue. I don't know if you would like me to hold off till later.
There will be opportunity for final argument after we hear from. I'm sorry. There will be opportunity for final argument after we hear from other members of the public who may wish to be heard on the matter. So at this point, Nick, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience here this evening who would like to speak to the issue of the application before us right now. Come on up.
I do. George Van Kula. V as in Victor, A-N, capital K-U-L-A.
And I should note, we received your letter,
Oh, thank you.
but now your appearance may supersede the letter, so please.
Well, now, I mean, and I apologize. I was out of town and I arrived late, so I don't know whether it was stated earlier in the proceedings what the enormous impact on our neighborhood was going to be as a result of the request being made tonight. But I was very eager to hear what that might be, because as a resident, a neighbor of this property, I live at 537 County Line Road, which is, I don't know, I think it's 6 or 7, maybe 8 houses down the road on County Line. I mean, I just can't imagine what the complaint would be and how we could have better neighbors. I am a member of St. Thomas of Villanova Parish. I know the Augustinians quite well. I had no idea this was happening until I got an anonymous, letter on my mailbox. So, as I said, very eager to hear what the potential issues are here. But I know that I know others of my neighbors feel the same way. Can't imagine a better neighbor. I mean, the worst thing that could happen is that this goes to somebody else. I mean, there are a lot of different scenarios here that could happen, where the property would not be kept up, where you'd have lots of in and out traffic. Again, there are lots of different scenarios. I can't imagine what people are thinking, but I just want to say that I and my family are very strongly in support of the request being made.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, Nick?
No.
Counsel?
No, thank you.
Quick board question for Mr. Van Kula and anyone else who's coming up. If you could move those photos off there and give it, you did indicate, but just give us a sense, and any other witnesses who come up, if you live proximate to the property, give us a sense of where your home is.
So I live down, I don't know if you can see, but County Line Road runs down this direction, so I'm not sure the scale, but I'm
All right.
down this way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Come on up. Good evening.
Good evening. I do. My name is Thomas Senna. Last name spelled S as in Sam, Z as in zebra, E-N-E. And
And Mr. Zena, where do you live in relation to the property?
just further down Upper Gulf, there's a cul-de-sac on the left-hand side there. Sure. Sorry. So just further down Upper Gulf, there's a cul-de-sac on the left called Oak Grove Lane. Just out there.
Is that at a stop sign?
Correct, yeah. So the two questions that I have is, I think, something that was mentioned before. I think considering all the negotiations, I think we can probably come to terms as far as finding common grounds as it relates to what's expected with the current residents, with the Augustinians moving in. My question is really, what would be the exit strategy after, and how long does the order plan on staying in the home? And what's their exit strategy once they say, okay, we're ready to leave the residence? And then finally, I'm surprised that nobody ran the math on the upkeep of the property. Obviously, it's an enormous property. It certainly has a lot of financial requirements to maintain, let it be landscaping. Obviously, it's a massive home, old home. So I don't know what the income of the order is, but can they afford it? Those are all the questions.
Nick? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we have the treasurer here too, so I don't know.
Well, again, I have already, yeah. Yeah, Father Michael DiGregorio, yeah. Father Horn, who's the treasurer of our Providence, tells me we can afford it. And I depend very much upon his expertise in these matters.
Not to be a wise guy, but he's not been sworn.
He has sworn allegiance to me.
Well, there we go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the other part of the question.
Exit strategy.
Oh, exit strategy. Hopefully not. We foresee the possibility of continual stream of novices coming in. This is the only way we survive as a religious community, is to continually welcome new people. So this is not something we see as a stopgap measure. Since it's being gifted to us, we intend fully to make use of it for this purpose. Have not really thought very seriously about what an exit strategy would be if that ever became necessary.
And one thing, if they did exit, then it would revert back to the current situation, because that's part of the conditions, of course. It would not run with the land. If the Augustinians exited the property, it would revert back to whatever the current zoning would be.
Can I speak to an issue that was raised earlier? Can I respond to an earlier question that was raised? With regard to the idea of the permanency, in our mind, what makes this house permanent is the community of 3 friars who will live there. They are a permanent community who are inviting these candidates in for a time in order to observe our way of life. But as I said earlier, we foresee that they would be there for a longer period of time, 4, 5, 6 years, or even more. So that's where I would attach the idea of permanency. Okay, great.
Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak to the application? Okay, seeing none, we will hear final arguments. Nick, if you want to start, and then...
If you wish, I mean, I think you've heard my argument. Unless we want me to expand, I'll turn it over to Mark if he wants to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Our clients do not oppose the request for a variance subject to conditions. We do oppose the request for the by right interpretation. We don't think that the ordinance supports it, nor does the law support it. We also think there is somewhat of a procedural issue, because typically the issue of an interpretation arises when there's a zoning officer's determination. The Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code in the jurisdiction section 909.1 A 3 specifically refers to the jurisdiction of the zoning hearing board where there is an appeal from a determination of the zoning officer. In this case, there has been none. So essentially, you're being asked to grant an advisory opinion where there's been no catalyst to do that in conjunction with a request for a variance. So procedurally, I think there's something to think about whether you actually even have the by right issue properly posed before you. The other comment just relates to the discussion that the board had reference to the slice of life case and the fact that this township has been very specific in its definition of family. And everyone knows, and particularly the residents here, why that is. So we can look at a lot of municipalities and a lot of ordinances in the suburban community, and you're not going to see an ordinance that specifically addressed what should happen in a single-family residence and a single-family neighborhood. And it's not just the list of what has been excluded. It says, or other similar living environment. And notwithstanding the best efforts of the applicant in the testimony, given the limitations and the restrictions of the ordinance and the definition, we don't think this qualifies as a by right use, even in addition to the procedural issue. The other interesting thing is sort of what slice of life stands for. Certainly it's an Airbnb case, but besides hand slapping the Commonwealth Court from eroding the law, which was an interesting comment. I'm a former clerk of the Commonwealth Court. That was when I rode horses into it. But in addition to that, what was an interesting statement that I had never seen before, and I may simply have missed it, was that an ordinance doesn't have to expressly exclude a use for it simply to be incompatible and not permitted. And what we've seen is some real threats to residential neighborhoods. In a variety of uses, there's some pretty hotly contested cases in the suburbs. But what the Supreme Court did was say, in residential neighborhoods, the usage should be really single-family homes. There's something very important to protect in single-family neighborhoods. And I think that's implicit in slice of life, even though it's an Airbnb case. So if you take the premise of the philosophy of slice of life, and really a pretty good pronouncement by the Supreme Court, couple that with the Radnor Township fathers and mothers who wrote the ordinance and amended the ordinance, this is not a by right use. Procedurally, it shouldn't be here. And the only issue before you today should be the variance. And as I've said previously, my clients do not oppose the grant of the variance, subject to the imposition of the conditions. Some of those are very important. And ultimately, this is not about the Augustinian's use per se, it's about what happens to a property but for the conditions. And that's our client's position. Thank you very much.
Just very briefly, we do urge the board grant a variance here. We've worked hard on these conditions and coming to them at pretty much the last moment. But one thing I will make clear is that, and there was not a written determination from Mr. Kachansky, but I did speak to him, and he told me that it was not a permitted use due to the fact that they were not related by blood, marriage, et cetera. And it was based on that I filed the, the request.
I'd like to respond to that. I sent an email to Mr. Chansky with a copy of
Right.
Ms. Delia, and I asked him specifically had he made a determination, and I can put this in the record.
Yeah, there was not a written determination.
He said, "Hi, Mark," was very friendly. "I did not issue a zoning determination in this appeal. It wasn't qualified." He said, "I did not issue a determination." I can make that part of the record, or we can simply stipulate that the zoning officer wrote.
He did write that. I saw that letter. I believe what he was referring to is a zoning determination, meaning a written zoning determination. But again, if the board would grant a variance request, we would live by the conditions and the variance itself. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson?
My office was authorized by the Board of Commissioners to come here in support of the neighbors. Therefore, the neighbors are fine with the grant of the variance, subject to the conditions. The township is in support of that. Likewise, the township is in opposition to the request of the as-right use. We don't think that's a proper reading of the ordinance. We don't think it's you actually have the jurisdiction under the facts in this case to actually render that determination. And I support everything that Mr. Jonas has argued up here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we start with a motion for consideration? If someone would like to make a motion.
I move that a variance be granted to permit the use as detailed and delineated here at the, on the record. In addition, the use should be, will be subject to the list of the proposed conditions presented as Exhibit A13.
Second?
I'll second.
Board discussion?
Even though it's my motion, I have one further question or potential clarification. I appreciate all the conditions, and I think we can get to a point where relief is granted. And I pose this to the board members. In the definition of family, it also goes out of its way to exclude certain uses. It says what a family is, but then it says further, a family as herein defined specifically excludes individuals and groups occupying a boarding or rooming house, lodging house, club, fraternity, dormitory, hotel, or other similar living arrangement. And I guess the question here is, does it make any sense, given the totality of the circumstance, to incorporate those as an additional condition? And I would perhaps add the word sorority after the word fraternity, out of an excess of caution.
You lost me.
I understand,
Yeah.
I fully understand the distinctions between the Augustinians and the institutions that they sponsor in the community.
Well, no, but the request is, are we going to grant a variance to the, actually to the definition of family? The definition of family includes everything you just mentioned. So by approving your motion, that incorporates all that. Right?
I don't think we're granting a variance to the definition of family. I think we're granting a variance to allow the proposed use in this.
To use fair, yeah, I mean,
in
it's,
this district. So
By way of this definition.
the
Because the
reason
use-
the
yeah.
reason a variance is required is because absent the variance, they're running afoul.
That's right.
so in essence, we're suspending application of that provision for purposes of allowing the applicant to proceed as they would like to.
Right. And my-
But
and my-
Bill's
and
point
my-
is, do we want to suspend the entire section or only the section that we've been focusing on tonight?
Because while the conditions, I think, are well drafted to protect the community, there may be an inadvertent, I wouldn't use the word loophole, but the gap there.
Well,
Well, I guess the point is, if you're saying we're only going to grant a variance from the first sentence of the definition, then someone could come back and challenge that ruling saying, well, wait a minute, you didn't get a variance from rooming house. So therefore, that's the grounds for appeal, because they didn't get any relief from that, and this is a rooming house. I'm suggesting the variance is from the entire definition, that's all.
yeah, and the overlay of the conditions that will be imposed should relief be granted. You know, these conditions apply, many of the conditions apply during the period of time that the order is the owner of the property.
I understand that.
And then there's the unwind provision, which is, bear with me for a second. Item 2 clearly states that the relief that we're granting here goes away in the event that the ownership of the property ever changes. And that's where the legal separateness, if you will, of the order and the university, where I feel that issue has been taken into consideration. I mean, if
And that, I guess, further, any of those uses would only occur under some concept of rental or leasing under number 6, old number 7, new number 6. I mean, I'm not arguing with you. I just want to make sure that we're not inadvertently missing anything. I would also, if you don't mind, does council have any perspective on this?
It would be, you could certainly add an additional condition if you feel that's necessary to this variance. So if you feel it's safer to include the exclusions that are currently in the definition, so there's no confusion or ambiguity with anyone going forward, you can do that.
Then I would propose to amend my motion to further indicate that an additional condition would be added to confirm that the use the permitted use would not include those items listed in the back portion of that definition of family, with the addition of the word sorority to be added after the word fraternity.
So the, excuse me, the permitted use will not include the excluded uses, and as modified by adding sorority after fraternity.
I'm proposing to amend my motion. That way I'll know if there's a second to that proposed amendment.
Is there a second to the proposed amendment?
I'll second.
I'm sorry, any discussion on the motion as amended?
I would just confirm my perspective that the hardship is the practical inability to use the property as a single-family home, as evidenced by the testimony regarding the marketing of the property and the inability to find an interested buyer or user. So I do think that presents the hardship, and I think the other conditions required for variance under our code are satisfied.
I would add that, I agree with Mark's comments. Without getting into the jurisdictional issue, I don't believe this is a by right situation. I don't think it meets the requirements of the ordinance. I believe there is a hardship as presented in the evidence, as Bill stated, so I intend to vote in favor.
The hardship issue was one which only a land use lawyer could love. Having ownership of a property of this significant nature and quality, yet being burdened by hardship, does suspend reality a bit. But I appreciate the fact that the owner is entitled to as full use of their property as is lawful and permitted by the code. And it does appear that prong of the analysis has been satisfied. Again, albeit it's different than many hardships we see, but nonetheless, I do believe that it satisfies the requirement set out in the law to show an unnecessary hardship. So I am inclined to support the motion. If there's no other discussion, I'll call a vote. Why don't we restate the motion clearly one last time so that we know what it is we are approving and not approving. We're not approving the by right. The motion is to
to add in as appropriate. The motion is to grant a variance to permit the use by the order as a home for their novices and staff, consistent with the terms set forth during the testimony, and further restricted by the list of proposed conditions, which are Exhibit A13, and one additional condition, which is that the use shall not be inconsistent with, well, let me put it this way. The use shall not include a boarding or rooming house, a lodging house, club, fraternity, sorority, dormitory, hotel. I'm going to stop there and not use the phrase or other similar living arrangement.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the application is approved 4-1. There being no other business before the zoning hearing board this evening, we're adjourned.